today.
Carol. I know two people that I know, Mallory and Dory. I know them.
Hi, Natasha.
Hello, how are you?
Good,
Dory?
how are you today?
Wonderful.
All right, we're gonna get started in a couple more minutes. Just want to give time for people to join.
Hi, Dory.
Hi, Miss Carol.
Mallory, hello.
Hi, Tosh. Nice to see you.
I know, a long time.
Okay, we'll give one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, we're gonna get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Aging Matters Reconnecting During and After the Pandemic virtual conference. Before we begin, some quick housekeeping items. Please mute your microphone and camera to avoid any connection issues or audio feedback. I have my camera off and I will be having my mic muted. Feel free to write in the comment section if you are having some technical issues and we will try to help you troubleshoot. My name is Dory Michael Martusis, Self-Determination Supervisor for the Department of Developmental Services, DDS, and part of this great group of virtual conference organizers. For 34 years, the Connecticut Coalition on Aging and Developmental Disabilities has worked to bring our Connecticut aging and disability communities together to share our knowledge, create opportunities and ideas to support the individuals we serve. CCADD, together with the Connecticut Department of Developmental Services, Connecticut State Department of Aging and Disability Services, and the Connecticut chapter of the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities are happy you are here to share in our virtual Aging Matters conference. Our theme this year is reconnecting during and after the pandemic. We are hoping that the information provided by Dr. Brooke Lloyd, Dr. Rachel Dusant, Mallory Valdez, case manager, and myself today will help you to reintegrate into the things you were doing before the pandemic and allow you to feel a sense of calm and understanding to lessen fears you may have as people begin to return to some sense of getting back to normal. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the planning committee for this series. Carol Grabby, Wayne Seidel, Bethor Miller, Patricia Richardson, Don Miller, Chris Gaynor, Tammy Venegay, Sandra Torfini, Mary Etter, Kelly Kendall, Erica DeFrancesco, as well as our wonderful presenters today. Again, we ask you that you keep your microphone on mute and please use the chat if you have any questions during the session. We have someone monitoring the chat box and we will try to get all your questions answered if time permits. We thank you to our speakers for volunteering their time to share their expertise with us. Without further ado, it is my honor and great privilege to hand the virtual baton over to Dr. Brooke Lloyd.
Thank you, Dory. Hi, everyone. So as we start, I'd like to briefly go over, what we're going to talk about today. So we'll take some time first to acknowledge the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on us all over the past 14 months. And after we do some reflecting, we'll discuss reintegration, which means returning to more like things were before the pandemic. But of course, things can't be exactly like they used to be. Dr. Duzant will talk about resiliency, which is our ability to stay strong in the midst of hardships and to bounce back, to come back from them. She'll also share some ways to practice resiliency. We will discuss some specific tools that can be used to help us come out of the quarantine safely and thoughtfully. And finally, Mallory will share with us some stories from some inspirational people who have both shown resiliency and used skills to make important decisions about their next steps for reintegration. So as we begin, we'd like to take a moment to discuss many ways that the pandemic has impacted our aging population, caretakers, society, and each one of us. We are all in this together. And as we reflect on these areas of impact, remember that acknowledging our emotions is very important to build compassion, both for ourselves and also for others. So let's start with the physical impact. Quarantine has impacted our people, our population daily because we're getting to move around less. We're exercising less because we're stuck in our houses. Many people have health conditions and advanced age, and they weren't able to go outdoors during the winter months. So they had a less active lifestyle and they sat down more often. And also there's been reduced access to doctors because there are less in-person appointments for routine care. And when people can't use masks or follow social distancing requirements, many of the appointments were done using telehealth with the physical evaluation component either delayed or just not done. And finally, domestic violence hotlines were called way less during March 2020, the first month of the pandemic, than is typical. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reported that perpetrators used COVID-19 as a weapon to restrict the victim's access to things like services, shelters, and counseling. Domestic violence victims are already isolated, but the pandemic increased the isolation, which made escape nearly impossible. Our body and our mind are very powerfully connected. Reducing our ability to get exercise and get healthcare to prevent problems has an impact on our emotional health. And it reduces our ability to work through regular daily challenges, to have resilience when we're faced with typical hardships. The New York Times had an article on languishing last month. So languishing is a big word for the experience that many of us have had this year of not being able to concentrate as well and feeling kind of joyless and aimless. It's that feeling that we're like in a fog and just muddling through the days. But don't get it confused with depression, because that's a serious condition that comes with hopelessness and other symptoms. But languishing, again, is something that's, just feeling like you're stuck and you're in a fog and everything feels a bit pointless. So if you can relate, look up the article in the New York Times or reach out to me and I'm happy to share it with you. It's good to know that a lot of other people felt this way too. We're not alone. So let's also pause to consider, the elephant in the room, the nature of the pandemic and COVID's deadly target of our older population. This causes appropriate fear among people who are, in the aging population. Some have responded by insulating themselves from society far beyond the recommendations made by the CDC. And then others fall on the other side of the spectrum by ignoring or not following the recommended precautions. And the emotional stress of balancing this tension really takes a toll. The added challenge of having an intellectual disability leaves individuals at the mercy and the protection of their caregivers and their family and their case managers, which adds a heavy weight to those caretakers. Many people feel a lot of guilt when people they serve get COVID because they worry that they might have given it to them. And if you are feeling a lot of guilt, it's really important to talk with someone that you trust. It's always helpful to consider seeing a professional therapist to help and just have a space to express how you feel and work through what you've experienced. We serve a really high-risk population, and we all carry a heavy burden when grieving the losses of the people that we love and serve. On top of that, we've been grieving without closure services. Having a funeral or a memorial service is so important to allow space to grieve and celebrate the person's life. The pandemic has limited this a lot. And then grieving in isolation easily can become depression, which, like we said, is a condition that needs treatment. So again, if you're feeling hopeless and depressed, definitely seek help. If you're not sure how to seek help, talk to your doctor and they'll be able to help you. This brings us to the social impact. Socially, the quarantine has lowered the amount of time that we're able to spend in connection and community with other people. We are social beings who innately desire connection. In-person connection has been reduced and replaced with connecting on screens like we are today. You know, Zoom and other platforms are very helpful, but they cannot replace face-to-face. And many of us and the people we serve have a hard time using these platforms. You know, Zoom and Teams and FaceTime are great, but how frustrating is it when you start to get glitchy and you can't understand or be understood? The truth is Zoom is not the same, and the mass meetups are okay, but they're not the same either. When we do see people in person, wearing a mask impacts our ability to communicate. People with hearing impairments can't read lips anymore. It's harder for people to hear you clearly through the mask. And there's an extra layer of stress on top of the hangout because we're trying to stay cautious and avoid contracting the virus. This lack of social time causes us to use Facebook, or other social media platforms as a replacement, but it's not a good replacement. Social media intensifies FOMO. FOMO is the fear of missing out. When we see people ignoring quarantine rules and the mask mandates and the travel restrictions and other rules, then we feel like we're left out. So we get that FOMO feeling. And social media has clear connections to anxiety and depression. First of all, social media leads people to compare themselves to others. Like, oh, look at his life is so great. He's so happy. He's so successful. Or look at her. She's so cute and perfect. I wish I looked like that. How many of us, compare ourselves to people when we see them on their posting on Facebook and Instagram? And over the past year, people have been relying on social media for connection while dealing with this insanely stressful year. Think about all the challenges our country has faced. We've had police brutality, racial injustice, an extremely contentious election, just to name a few. Now, remember, it's really important to remember that the engineering of these social media platforms organizes the information. So we see posts and articles that support what we already think. They make us feel even more strongly about what we already think, even if it's not true, right? And what do we want? Do we want to think what we think, or do we want to know the truth? Thinking more strongly about what we already think is true just makes us disagree with others and moves us away from helpful agreement and consensus. So the politics of the situation have led us to judge people from all sides and be judged. Everyone's getting judged on how much, what's appropriate amount of social isolation during COVID. You're either too cautious or you're too careless, and no one can win. And in the end, how do we feel? We feel even more isolated and alone. So to top it off, our spiritual and religious practices were shifted to doing that alone too. Churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, and other gatherings had reduced capacity. Yoga groups had limited capacity. Many of the signups require people to use the internet, which can be really confusing and really frustrating. The experiences that bring to life spiritual beliefs have been lacking by not going to gatherings, practicing communion, experiencing worship services, and attending shared meals or other ways of connecting. And that's discouraging for us all. And people who have the added struggle of an intellectual disability already have a harder time holding on to belief systems and drawing from that intellectual knowledge. So how much more so when the experiences that strengthen faith are lacking. They're not getting to do them. It's a hard time. So thankfully, here we are. We're coming to the end of the quarantine. We've talked a lot about the challenges of the quarantine, but this shift is challenging too. Businesses are reopening to full capacity. The CDC in Connecticut are lifting the mask mandates for vaccinated people. We're all having mixed feelings right now. In many ways, we're joyful and we want to celebrate this change, but in some ways, we're grieving the loss of some of the positive changes we enjoyed through COVID. Some people have had deeper connections with the people they live with. Most of us have spent way less time in traffic, right? We all know that the creatures of the world and the environment have been really thankful for us staying off the roads and not polluting as much. There's a huge reduction in the flu and stomach bugs this year because we wore masks all year long. It was the lightest flu season in a very long time. How many of us did not get the flu this year? How great was that? So, as we look at reintegration, it's important to mark this transition. There's both joy and there's grief as we say goodbye to this chapter and we move on to the next. It's important to reflect on some of the low moments of quarantine and some of the high ones too. Every hard thing we go through teaches us something, and we are forever changed by that experience. As I reflect last spring, I was just learning how to wear a mask, and now I consider myself a professional. As we move into reintegration, let's mark the transition with a celebration, a memorial, a photo book, or some other way to remember this past year. Now, before we move on, I'd like us all, if you're willing, to just pause and remember one positive moment, one positive change, one positive outcome from the pandemic on your life. So if you can just pause and reflect. And as you remember that positive thing, if you're willing, just type it into the chat box. If you can just simplify it to 1 or 2 words, that would be great. If you're willing to do that, Mallory would like to share with everyone some of the positive memories and experiences and moments that each of us are willing to share with the group.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. So I see quite a few comments coming in. I'm going to give it another minute and then we can start to discuss some of the things that you've all shared. Okay, so thank you guys for taking the time to reflect, and thank you to those of you who've shared. So some of the things that we shared were game nights with my adult children, more time with family, gratitude, better sleep, getting a new kitchen, being able to work from home, taking classes with your children, feeling safe, not commuting, more personal time, more time with family, again, just being home with your children, family time, seeing a lot of family time here. I've also been able to enjoy more time with my family too, so I can relate not only to that, but so many of the comments that you're all sharing. I see somebody's learned how to crochet, pretty neat. Virtually seeing family who live far away, appreciation for life and freedom, family time, working from home, being able to take care of elderly people in your life, getting close with a family member who was alone and experiencing loneliness, memories with children and aging parents, providing outreach to older adults, especially our oldest senior at 105 years old. That's a great memory. Seeing the humanity in healthcare workers, the list goes on and on. Thank you all for sharing.
I saw the one about the kitten, getting a new kitten and getting the time to spend with your kitten since you're working from home safely. So that is wonderful as well. So as we, thank you all again for that time to reflect and think about something that, that was good, a positive change or growth from from the pandemic. So Dr. Duzant now is going to expand on this and share a little bit more with us about resiliency.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. So as we're thinking about reconnecting with people and going back into the community, we want to think about what skills we have had and what skills we can actually increase to develop better resiliency. When we think about resiliency, think about how we as people weather the storm, the unexpected, the extreme conditions, etc. So you see, we have these beautiful birds and they're out in the extreme. And even though it's extreme weather, we still see the leaves, they're still flourishing, they're still actually hanging on to those branches. So it's the way in which we actually hang on to hope and how we actually cope despite what's going on around us. So as we age, we are forced to adapt with each stage, with each age, to actually do better each time that we have things like adversity, trauma, tragedy, or threats. These are all opportunities for us to increase our resiliency. So we're going to look at ways we can do that. So I will tell you that, in research, they talk about the 7 C's of resiliency when there's children or young adults, et cetera, right? Our ability to be confident, which you believe in your own abilities, your ability to be feeling a sense of competency when we're younger, right? We're learning new things. So when we master something like tying our laces, that's all great for us. As we age, competency looks different for everyone. Feeling connected and that social connectedness, that is very important for us in terms of coping. Coping is yet another way that we actually do better at being resilient. Our character, which is our sense of worth, that is what we develop over time. And that changes as we age. Our contribution and what we contribute to society, that is also important. And with the pandemic, sometimes some of us felt like we were contributing less because we had to change the way we contributed, right? So sometimes we were out, we were volunteering in the community and we could see our efforts. But when things changed and we went to virtually providing services or actually only calling a person, instead of that hands-on, we may have felt like we contributed less, but we probably meant the world to the people that we were helping at the time. Lastly, of the 7 C's is control. The pandemic definitely left us with this feeling that we are not in control. There were so many things that we did not know about the illness or how to prevent it. So having a sense of control usually helps how resilient we are. And as we age, there's key characteristics about those who are more resilient over time. So we're going to look forward to that. And one of those things includes a sense of hope, social support, community involvement, being physically active, having a healthy diet, and being independent with some of our daily activities. So how do we measure resilience? Well, let's look at the standard ways. As you can see, we have several measures that we can use to really standardize how we measure it. But for the purposes of this presentation, let's think about ways that are not standardized that we can measure how we cope. How do we cope with things coming our way? You can look at that as how does a person react to situations in their environment? You can even do your own assessment of how you cope or how others cope by actually asking them open-ended questions to better understand how they feel. For example, while someone's thinking and contemplating going back out into the community, you may ask them, so how do you feel about still wearing your mask? That's open-ended. And you're trying to find out, what are they going to do to cope with the change in the mask mandates? So once we measure our resiliency, it makes it easier for us to think about how has COVID impacted our ability to cope. there were several disruptions, as Dr. Lloyd mentioned, right? We used to use our doctor's appointments even as a way to be socially connected with our providers and a feeling just to feel that we're okay. It was great to have those check-ins, but due to COVID, those check-ins were limited. Sometimes it was a phone call, sometimes it was virtual, and others, unfortunately, were just rescheduled. So we were left to not really know, right? So it made it harder for us to cope with how do we know if we're really okay? And then trying to manage the social isolation through technology, as Dr. Lloyd talked about, we had glitches, we had delays in internet. We also had some people who didn't have internet at all, or resources were very limited. That made it very difficult for a lot of people to stay connected with their community. We had disruptions in the way that we could communicate with family members. It was great to see that someone said what they really appreciated about this time was the ability to connect with people still virtually. So we have different ways of looking at the things that we had to manage and cope. So that's a great example of someone looking at, our time to be away in a positive way, because they were able to connect with someone in their family virtually that maybe they may not have connected with otherwise. Quarantines, they imposed this isolation that really disrupted our social connectedness. And that's one of the things that we use to cope on a daily basis. Think back, you had a rough day, you didn't get along with someone. You might have used social connectedness, like grabbing a cup of coffee with a friend to just talk it through. That made it very difficult with COVID-19. So as we're thinking about our ways to kind of reconnect with each other, we should think about nurturing things that help us cope better also. Now, masking, as Dr. Lloyd said, it was very difficult sometimes to manage wearing a mask. And if you had any hearing difficulties, if you have visual impairments, for example, if you're just not good at reading social cues by just looking at a person's eyes or their body language, it made a very confusing time. So our typical communication, it was disrupted. All of these things were affected, and it hurt some of our ability to be more resilient. But as I said, resilience is something that we've all been thinking about. Well, is it nature or is it nurture? So as we're thinking about that, right, there were some old theories that resilience was something different people were born with a different amount of resiliency, right? We were born with this different ability or way of coping, right? And then over time, as research grew, as people showed more resilience in general and their better way of coping, we then had a theory that, is it nurture? Is there an environment that can help us actually cope and deal with things better? So the Geriatric Nursing Journal had this great article about how older people, they say, oh, you can't teach older people new tricks. Well, not true. Older people have the same capacity as our younger counterparts, in order to be resilient and to cope better. As a matter of fact, our baby boomer generation has actually lived through several times of adversity that affected our economics, that affected our cultural divides, a lot of things that are happening now. So we have people who have had experience with having situations that were just adverse in nature, and now it's kind of compounded due to COVID-19. So the best way for us to kind of manage and nurture our way of coping is to think of a way to change the narrative. As someone said, it took me time to, spend time with my family. So it wasn't something being taken away, it was something gained, right? So cognitive reframing is the way that we think about a situation and how you handle the situation. So a picture is a picture, of course, but the frame that we put it in makes a big difference. The frame attracts people to you or away from that picture. right? So let's think about the way that we frame our thoughts and how we can think about things in a different way. If we can think about them in a different way, we might be able to cope a little bit better. So your ability to handle a new situation depends on how you think about the situation. So isolation could have meant, I can't do the things time with your family, time with your kittens. This is a way of looking at things just differently, and it'll help you cope better. Cognitive reframing, when you try and learn new things and activities, it helps with your cognitive flexibility. The way you think about things getting flexible actually helps you, and it builds your resiliency. So think about learning something new. Awesome. One of the things that we talked about is your confidence and your sense of competency, right? So how we think about ourselves and the way that we contribute to the world is another way that we can build our resiliency. We've spent time away from people and not having those activities, those places, and those communities that we used to walk into and get all the love and all the attention and say, hey, I missed you. It wasn't happening as much during the pandemic. Now's our opportunity to get that back in our way and in the way we feel most comfortable. So acknowledging your accomplishments and your talents are great. And you can think about how you can share that and contribute to the community in the way that you feel most comfortable reintegrating into the community. So research has shown meditation, mindfulness, it's something that can help us all, young and older, improve our frustration tolerance, improve the way that we regulate our emotions, how we manage the way we think. And you know why? It requires some attention. It requires us to be in the here and now and really focus on what is going on now. A lot of times we kind of think ahead and we think about the things that are bothering us and what could go wrong. So unfortunately, when we're feeling that way, our thoughts kind of carry us away from the here and now. And when we're carried away, it can lead to some disruptive thinking and what could go bad. So a way to help with your resiliency and to nurture it is actually think positively. Think about positive things happening going forward. So I have two different activities we're going to do today, right? It's really hard doing something virtual and you don't get to see people, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do two different activities, right? So we're going to do one activity where we're visualizing something happening really nice, really well, and that's reintegrating in the community. And then the other one we're going to do is a gratitude exercise, okay? So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to give you the opportunity. If you were standing like I was standing, go ahead, take a seat, rest your feet, and let's take some time to try both of these activities, okay? The visualization is going to be very brief, okay? And it's going to lead into our gratitude exercise. So if you feel comfortable, do as I did. Feel free. Close your eyes. Now, since we're thinking about reintegrating out into the community, I want to suggest imagine yourself in a place that's outside. I want you to think about the wind. It's nice and cool. It's just the right temperature. And we're going to take a moment to visualize clouds. And in these clouds, we can create some great shapes. We're going to create a shape of a heart to give ourselves love and compassion. And think about, as the wind blows, watch that heart blow with the wind as you send that love and compassion to others. I want you also pick a new cloud, and in this cloud, I want you to think about one thing that you're grateful for. So this cloud can turn into that kitten that you spent time with. That cloud can become that family member you spent time with. That cloud can be what you finished crocheting. I want you to take the time to look at whatever image that you created and think about what would that be like as you reintegrate into the community. What would it be like to meet a friend on a park bench and you crocheting together and still being safe? I want you to think about those virtual meetups with family. What would it look like to now see your family member in person? Feel how nice, how joyful it would be to make those connections again. So as we did this brief visualization, I want you to keep your eyes closed because we're going to go ahead and we're going to do an exercise of gratitude. So let's take some time to give our bodies the opportunity to relax. We're going to show gratitude to our bodies. They do so much for us. They take us from one place to another. They communicate to others. And no matter what our abilities are in our bodies, they do things for us every day. That can include just keeping us nourished through the day. So let's go ahead, take a minute to find one thought of gratitude. It could be being grateful for joining the conference today. It can be having your favorite cup of coffee this morning. It can be the ability to breathe. So I want us to go ahead and take a deep breath in for 2. 1, 2. Out. 2, 1. Breathe in. 1, 2. And out. 2, 1. We're going to start with the top of our head where that thought is, that thought of gratitude. Think about what you're grateful for. And as you're thinking about it, go ahead, unfurl those eyebrows, have them be nice and relaxed. Allow your forehead to relax so much that you notice your eyes. They don't feel heavy. They feel nice and relaxed. And they also feel calm from giving it a break from all the things that it does for us during the day. We're going to move down to our nose and also allow your nose to just experience relaxation, our nice warmth of our breath as we go in and out and exhale and inhale. Our nose and our eyes, they do so much for us. Let's give the time to just relax. We're going to move down to our cheeks and our jaw. They do so much work, whether it's smiling or talking They do a lot for us. So go ahead and give your cheeks and your jaw just time to relax. As you relax your cheek and your jaw, let your tongue just rest at the bottom of your mouth. Allow the time to just rest. We're going to move down to our neck. Our neck does a lot for us. It holds our head up nice and tall, or sometimes it allows our head to rest to the side as we ponder things that we want to do. So give your neck time to just rest. As you rest your neck, you might notice your shoulders may just drop a little, because your shoulders are now feeling the relief from your neck, just relaxing. Our shoulders can hold some tension, so we can go ahead and let that go. Let's be grateful for all those body parts that help us through our day. As our shoulders become relaxed, our hands, they may feel like they're just at the side of your body or just at your thigh, just resting, nice and safe. No tension. Think about the things that our hands do for us. For some of us, they communicate our language into other people. For some of us, they carry things. But for now, we're going to let them enjoy some time to relax. We're grateful for what they do to us and for us every day. We're going to move down to our chest. Feel that breath going. Your chest is rising and falling. Your chest is an important part, as well as your stomach. When you're anxious, when you're nervous, those places tell you. Now's the time to let your chest and your belly just relax. Our stomach nourishes us daily. It processes our food. Now's the time to let it relax. We're going to move down to our hips and our thighs. They help us to bend, to sit. We want to give it an opportunity to just rest. You might notice the chair beneath you, how your legs can just rest. Go ahead and feel them resting softly against your chair. Allow the tension to leave as you exhale. We're going to move down to our knees and our calves. Our knees help us out. They help us every day. They help us if we're walking or if we're sitting. So they are very helpful to us, and we're thankful. We're thankful for them, and we're thankful for anything that they can do for us. If we have sensations or we don't have sensations in these areas, we're still grateful and thankful. Let's go ahead and move to our ankles and our toes. Let our feet just relax in our socks and our shoes. Our toes may spread a little bit as we relax them. As our feet are against the floor, just imagine it being connected to nature, connected to the ground, that we are grounded in our sense of gratitude and our sense of being safe. Go ahead, take some deep breaths in. 1, 2, out, 2, 1, in, 1, 2, out, 2, 1. Feel free to open your eyes. I want you to think about how you felt doing that activity. How did you feel visualizing things? Sometimes visualizing things is a better way for us to cope than doing something with our bodies. Sometimes visualizing things can actually help us think about what are we going to do next. And we can think about all of the positive ways it can go instead of taking the time to think about what could go wrong. So I encourage you to try that. So now that we did something where we all could try to help our resiliency, let's talk about a couple of other ways we can help ourselves. So another way to boost our resiliency, and it's shown and it's proven, especially as we age, the healthier our diets, the better we feel. And small changes is all we need to do. So think about, are we going to go ahead and are we going to add some more water in our lives, right? We could all benefit from some water. And we can add snacks that are healthy, an apple, some carrots. Those are ways to kind of boost our resiliency and our immune system. So we can think about, in addition to our diet, what can we do to move, right? We spend a lot of time at home and maybe very sedentary, not really doing a lot of activity. So we can think about how can I reintegrate into the community and maybe feel a little bit more comfortable because we're outside. Think about meeting up a friend for a walk or bringing a chair and you and someone you know just doing some chair yoga. Another thing about cognitive reframing is we have to keep our minds flexible. And the way we do that is cognitive exercises. We do puzzles. We can do word searches. We can try a new hobby. These are ways to kind of keep us sharp as we age, as we all need to be sharp, and also to help us with that cognitive flexibility so we can reframe the experiences we have so we can have a better way of coping. And now, maintaining social connectedness, very important. And this is why reintegrating back into the community is so important. The more we can feel connected, the better we do. So I want to encourage you to go ahead and try to think about ways that you can be socially connected to others that you may have missed during this time, and doing it in a way that you feel most comfortable. So to give you ways to improve your social connectedness, we have some examples. And one of the examples that Valerie's going to share with you is Nancy and Bertha. And she has a great story of how both of these individuals were able to manage and cope with COVID-19 and also reintegrating into the community. Valerie?
Thank you, Dr. Toussaint. So far, we have covered a lot. We've talked about some of the facts, the fears, ways to cope, mindfulness, reconnecting with the community, our family, our friends, and about resilience. A way that I describe resilience is kind of like bouncing back. So taking a look of what got you down, reflecting, and most importantly, recovering. In a previous slide that Dr. Toussaint shared, there were two birds. They were weathering the storm. Despite their cold, wintry surroundings, they stayed on that branch. They knew the storm would cause stress and changes, but they also knew that they would get through it. Those two birds remind me so much of two ladies who are not only important to me, but inspire me. Bertha and Nancy. We'll soon share a short video of how Bertha and Nancy were able to get through the pandemic together, adapt to changes, get used to new norms, and most importantly, while working through all of this, remaining socially connected and bouncing back. So just like those two birds, Nancy and Bertha are going to show you how they've weathered the storm and continue to keep happily chirping. Before we share the video, I'd like to read some quotes that Nancy and Bertha asked me to share during their presentation. Bertha shared, "Oh, how I missed going out for coffee and for shopping. I love to shop. Now I go out. I wear my mask. I am safe. I can't wait to go to Six Flags this summer." Nancy thought that she would like to share, "I was scared I was going to get the COVID. I was scared I would be sick. I missed going out and I was really, really sad that I had to miss my Disney cruise." We're going to share a short video and I hope you all enjoy the show. I hope you all enjoyed seeing Nancy and Bertha and how, despite the fears that they've had, they found the courage inside of themselves to get up, stay connected, and they ventured out to do the things that they love.
Thank you, Mallory. It was so nice to see Nancy and Bertha use some tools to help them work through this hard time. So, as we discuss reintegration, we do want to also share with you some tools to help you reintegrate well. One important tool is reflecting. There's a lot of information coming at us from the government, from our friends, from our family, work, school, everywhere, And as we take it in, it's so important to stop and consider our own perspective. So reflecting is just taking some time to consider your own thoughts, your feelings, the concerns you have, the needs, the things that you like and don't like, and your hopes and dreams. It's hard to stay true to ourselves when we're getting pushed and pulled in so many different directions. So give yourself this gift of self-reflecting. Now, one way to self-reflect when it comes to making a decision is through pros and cons. So in just a moment, we'll talk about how someone used this skill of thinking about the positive and the negative parts of a decision in order to make that decision. And then finally, there are two helpful websites that you can use if you're interested. One is an event planning tool that uses COVID rates to help you identify the risk of having a larger gathering or going to a larger gathering. And the other is a self-checker that you can use if you or someone you know was exposed to COVID and help you decide what next steps to take. So just those are for reference if anybody's interested. Now, there is a lot of fear going around in the midst of this pandemic. And now that we have vaccines, getting one is a really big decision. Some people are worried about the side effects after getting vaccinated or the long-term side effects that may or may not exist. We don't know yet. Some people got the first dose, but now they're nervous about getting their second dose. Now, when our body feels anxious, it's a signal that it's time for us to stop and to reflect. Now, what does your body want to do when you feel anxious? It naturally wants to avoid or escape whatever makes us feel uncomfortable, right? Whatever that causes that anxiety, we want to get away from it. But that actually doesn't work, right? Because you stuff it down and then it just pops up again when you least expect it. So if we avoid addressing the vaccine fear or the vaccine anxiety, will ultimately avoid getting vaccinated. And by avoiding, that's you deciding not to get vaccinated, right? Effectively, because that's what your behavior is doing. But we all know avoiding is not making an informed decision. It's just avoiding the problem. So rather than letting anxiety control you, let's take the signal that anxiety gives us that it's time to do some reflecting. Like, what is going on? What am I feeling? What's going on underneath this? Consider your worries and do some research. Be sure that you use trusted sources of information. So don't go to Facebook posts or memes or, your friend's blog. If you're looking up information on vaccines, who do we want to hear from? Someone who knows about vaccines, right? Like doctors or agencies that do this. There are lots of studies happening right now. There's new outcomes almost every day. So it's hard to keep up on these things, and we want to make sure we get accurate information. So once you've taken that time to look into it yourself, then it's really important to talk it over with someone that you trust. It's really easy to let fear of COVID leak into our lives in other areas. So we have to intentionally address our concerns directly. And sometimes after we reflect, we end up making decisions that help others more than they help ourselves. And sacrifice is a beautiful thing. So let's now discuss someone who did use the skill of pros and cons.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. So just like Bertha and Nancy, Joe is also an inspiration to me. But besides an inspiration, Joe is so much more. He's a social butterfly. He loves being active, traveling, going out, and he absolutely loves hugging others. The pandemic has limited Joe from doing many of these things. He knew it wouldn't be forever, but he was equally nervous and excited to create a plan using his supports and help him get back to doing the things that are meaningful to him. So Dr. Lloyd's going to show you a tool that Joe used when he made an informed decision about getting the COVID-19 vaccine.
So Joe used pros and cons to help him decide whether or not to get vaccinated. Now the pros, the good things, and the cons, the not so good things about getting vaccinated, okay? So the pros for Joe were, one, Joe loves a quarter pounder and going out to restaurants. So he felt that getting vaccinated would let him do that more comfortably and safely. Joe values spending time with his friends, and he felt that getting vaccinated lets him go indoors to do activities with them where he cannot socially distance. Joe doesn't like to wear a mask for a long time. So this would allow him to spend more time with his friends because he wouldn't have that uncomfortable feeling of the mask on his face the whole time. Joe also has a hard time understanding people when they're wearing a mask because it feels muffled, too muffled like that. So getting vaccinated would help him spend time with his friends free of masks so he could hear and be heard. Joe also loves to give hugs and fist bumps, and getting vaccinated would let him have this connection again if people he sees are also comfortable, doing hugs and fist bumps. Finally, Joe likes to go on international vacations every year. He goes to Italy or Mexico each year, and getting vaccinated would let him do this again because they're finding that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are protecting people from the other COVID strains too. Joe loves to go to birthday parties and celebrations, so this would allow him to do that more freely. So those were the pros for Joe. And then Joe considered the cons, the not so good things about getting vaccinated. So Joe considered that worrying about side effects of getting vaccinated was a problem for him. He really didn't want to feel bad. He didn't want to have a sore arm. He didn't want to get a fever. He didn't want to have any of those side effects. Joe did not like the idea of having to get 2 shots. And Joe also worried about how the shot may affect him in the future if there were some unknown side effects that, we're not aware of yet. So as Joe looked at that decision, he considered his pros, and he picked the one and he actually picked 2 that were most important to him. So for Joe, of all the pros that he listed, the 2 that stood out to him the most were vacations abroad and celebrations. So those are what really, what stood out and were most important to him about the pros that he picked. Joe also looked at the cons, and he picked the con that he felt like caused him the most concern and worry, the worst con that he could think of. And for Joe, it was the risk the unknown risk of what could happen. Maybe the vaccine would have long-term effects that he wasn't quite aware of yet, and studies haven't shown yet. So when Joe looked at those two choices, he looked at, it's hard to look at a big list, but if you just look at your top pro and your top con and you weigh them out and compare them, Joe looked at those and he said, you know what, at the end of the day, I care more about going on my international vacations and celebrating freely than about, this unknown worry about what might happen long-term, So Joe decided to get vaccinated. In the end, Joe actually did not experience any side effects from the vaccines, but he still does wonder if there might be unknown future side effects. Now, Joe has friends who are not vaccinated, so he'll now be doing a pros and cons when considering how to handle decisions about spending time with those friends. And after Joe made his decision to get vaccinated, he was able to go on vacation. So Mallory will share some pictures and some details from that decision and outcome.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. So as we saw, Joe did decide to get vaccinated. He obtained factual information, he talked with his supports, his doctor and other medical providers, and he used the pros and cons tool that Dr. Lloyd just showed you. His stress and anxiety about reconnecting lessened significantly. Receiving the vaccine allowed Joe to go out to a restaurant and get that burger that he's been craving, spend time with his family and friends, give hugs and fist bumps, and take that fun-filled vacation to Atlantic City. Soon we're going to see Joe in action. But before we see him in action, I'd like to share a few quotes from Joe. I missed going to Texas Roadhouse. I missed all of my friends a lot. I had the best time in Atlantic City last week. I'm happy I get to go out and see my friends again. Really happy. Now we're going to share a short video of Joe. I hope you all enjoy. So I hope you were all able to enjoy seeing Joe do all the things that he loves. And although the activities completely exhausted him, you can see that in the last picture, it hasn't stopped him. Joe celebrated a birthday last week with his friends and his family, and he's already planning his next vacation. So I just want to remind you guys that we're all in this together, but we will get through it. Remember, we're all resilient and small changes can lead to big things. I'd like to end this portion of the presentation with a quote from Franklin Roosevelt. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. I hope that you can all remember that your resilience, find ways to connect into the community, and find positive things to look forward to. I'm going to open it up to Dory.
Thank you, Mallory. Well, I'm going to dovetail off of Mallory with the quote. What you do today will improve all your tomorrows. Remember, reconnecting during and after the pandemic helps if you take your time and connect at your pace, maintain and or create new routines, find a friend, and share when you need to. Tomorrow can bring travel, hugging your grandchildren, having an 80th birthday party, going to the movies, a smile on your face without a mask, a stroll with a friend, return to your bowling league and get that turkey, catching a fly ball at a baseball game, whether it be the Yankees or the Red Sox, enjoying an ice cream, dancing with people, singing in a choir, going to a concert. So if we could just take a minute and think about what your tomorrow will bring, what your hope is for your tomorrow with reconnecting. And Mallory's going to be kind enough to read what you write in the chat so that we can all share what tomorrow's going to look like for us.
Thank you, Dory. Okay, so we're going to allow everyone a couple minutes to think of what you're looking forward to, and we hope that you'll kindly share with us. Okay, so we've got a lot of great comments coming through. So I'm going to talk about everything that people are looking forward to do tomorrow. Hugging my dad, going to see some live music, me too. Summer concerts, hugging and kissing extended family and friends, going out to eat. You might see Joe. Hugging people, hugging adult children for the first time in 14 months. That's a long time. Seeing family they haven't seen in over a year. Again, a long time. Vacationing, larger friends and family gatherings, taking grandchildren to special events, family time at the lake, seeing extended family again, seeing friends and giving hugs, seeing coworkers and going back into the office. I'll see you there, Tash. Rescheduling a trip which had to be canceled for an anniversary, seeing family and friends without worrying about getting sick, taking a vacation in the near future, being able to see my family and friends in person, getting back to the office daily, traveling, seeing my seniors' faces, hugging people, vacationing, going for a massage, meeting my granddaughter, meeting my brother's twins. There are so many things that we have to look forward to. So we really hope that you've all learned from this presentation, and we hope that you were able to look forward to tomorrow, and you are resilient. Small things can lead to big, big changes.
Thank you, Mallory, and thank you everyone for taking a moment and dropping in your chat what your tomorrow will bring when you reconnect. As we conclude the virtual conference, I want to thank my fellow presenters for providing me and hopefully all of you today with a sense of relief and excitement to know we can reconnect after the pandemic, and think back to how we were all able to stay connected during the pandemic. I learned from Dr. Lloyd that it's okay to experience the fear of missing out, FOMO, a new acronym for me. Dr. Dusant, much appreciation to you for allowing me to create my thought of gratitude. I am grateful that my family, friends, and coworkers have been there to help and support me through my nervousness and stress. I may be feeling when I'm reconnecting. Lastly, Mallory, thank you for such wonderful stories of inspiration from Bertha, Nancy, and Joe, who are now my role models to get out there, bounce back, and be resilient to reconnect. Again, thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to place them in the chat. And if time allows, we'll be more than happy to answer your questions. If we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to send out answers to all of them. Again, thank you to the wonderful presenters and all of you for joining us today.
I did notice one question that was in the chat early on. That was a question about languishing and what the difference is between languishing and depression. So just to briefly summarize, and again, if you'd like the full article, reach out to me or look it up in the New York Times. But languishing is this somewhat natural response to the pandemic because it stretched, on and on and on. It meant we were less able to be social, which is so important for our health. And because of that shared experience, time started getting like mushed together. We're having trouble concentrating because every day feels like the same. We had a hard time feeling like excited about things, like looking forward to things, having joy. And the days kind of felt aimless, like you're just doing, the same thing over and over again. So it's like that foggy feeling. Like think about, you spent 3 hours playing Candy Crush instead of working on a project or something meaningful. Like that's the languishing where you're just like doing things that aren't that important or meaningful because you don't have the ability to concentrate on doing something that is really important. But depression is a different whole different thing. It's a clinical disorder. It has a lot of symptoms, hopelessness, depressed mood. You can have sleep changes, kind of lack of interest in anything, feeling really guilty or useless, low energy, having trouble concentrating. Your appetite or your weight might change. You might feel like either kind of like you don't want to do anything or maybe kind of restless, like you can't sit still, and having some really serious thoughts, possibly like suicidal thoughts. So with depression, you definitely want to talk to somebody. And if you're not quite sure which one you're experiencing, then it doesn't hurt to talk to your doctor, talk to somebody about it so you can help figure out what's going on. And even if it's languishing and we're coming to the end, it doesn't hurt to have someone to talk to, a counselor, or talk to your doctor to get a referral. I hope that answered that question.
If there are any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat and hopefully Mallory could help and read them out. I did notice that there was a comment in the chat about there are some people who, due to medical issues, can't get the vaccine. Hi, Carol, I see you waving. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So Mallory, do you see any other questions in the chat?
I see a couple new messages coming through. I think it's just a couple of thank yous. Yes, and in regards to the vaccine, we understand that it is everyone's choice, that it's not for everyone, and there are some people who can't have it. So if someone is going to have a severe allergic reaction, obviously if they use that pros and cons tool, we would say that the cons would outweigh, for them. But again, they could certainly talk to their medical providers. So we do understand that. We just wanted to show you how Joe made his informed decision, and he did happen to just choose to get the vaccine.
And, you're making a really good point that, we talked about how it's so easy to judge people, right? Instead of consider that they have, choices, they have their own reflections on what they need to do and what's right for them. So don't assume just because someone decides to or not get the vaccination that, that they're thinking like wrong, right? Like, let's listen to people like, oh, what helped you make your decision? I'm trying to make that decision too. Let's talk about it. So we want to, encourage people to have conversations and listen, and not get angry and reactive when we hear someone has a different opinion than us.
Mallory, are there any more comments or questions in the chat before we wrap up and allow people to get reconnected?
I do not see any other questions. I think that's it. So last call, guys. You have any questions? Now's the time. I think that wraps it up.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And if you do think of questions after, feel free to reach out to myself, Mallory, Dr. Dusant, Dr. Lloyd, Bethora Miller, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you had. So enjoy the rest of your day. And again, we really, truly appreciate you joining us. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you all.